All right, we are live on the World Ablaze YouTube channel, as well as on those of you who are part of the 1249 Society. It's free to join. You can follow us and join us there. Do you hear that, John?
Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Hang on one second.
Gotcha.
This is too funny.
Yeah. All these new toys, man. You got to figure out how to make them work. I'm right there with you, buddy. Just don't hit the ejector seat button. That's the one you don't want to hit.
All right, here we are. It's like, what's going on? It's funny. I had all these other windows pulled up. So we are live, John, and we just exposed how live we are.
That's right.
It's a technology, but it's good to be back. I think it's been a while since I've been doing any one of the podcasts like we're just one-on-one, and then also just going live on YouTube. So again, for my listeners out there that are part of the World Ablaze just community, continue to follow us, and we're going to be doing more of these live episodes, as well as join our 1249 Society. So if you go to worldablaze.org, you can sign up for free, join our community. That's its own social app, and you can find out about these types of events like this and live interviews. So super pumped, super excited. John Edwards is a brother of mine, somebody who I'm super fond of and was blessed to meet back in 2018, brother?
I believe so. Yeah, it's 2018. I think that's accurate. I still have the poster somewhere, but yeah.
2018 in Memphis. My first trip out to Memphis for a men's conference to keynote the men's morning of spirituality out there. And John Edwards was the witness speaker that went before me. And it's very difficult to speak after I heard his witness and his story. Because of the amazing transformation that you've experienced in your own life. And, obviously since that time, John, we've become, really good friends and brothers, and our families have met, and it's just been really awesome to kind of see what the Lord's doing in your life. And I think for the viewers out there and the listeners out there, this is entitled, right, From Addict to Evangelist. And that's a real true story. I think it simplifies what we're dealing with here in John's story. And so I want to welcome to the show my brother John Edwards, the founder of Pew Ministries. If you those of you who are familiar with his are you calling it Just a Guy in the Pew or Pew Ministries, or is it both?
Sure. So the nonprofit is Pew Ministries, right? That houses Just a Guy in the Pew, the podcast, and the missions and all those things we're doing. So the Pew Ministries is the name of the nonprofit that houses it all.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So let's
I like to confuse people.
No, it makes total sense. It's like I have to explain the different elements of World Ablaze as being kind of the parent apostolate, but then we have Priest, Prophet, King, PPK, and a couple of other different initiatives underneath that. But let's take it back, brother, because you weren't always Catholic, and even when you were Catholic, you weren't always the Catholic that you are today. Praise be to Jesus Christ. So let's share your story, because I don't want to steal too much of the thunder there, because I think obviously the title shares a little bit about it, From Addict to Evangelist. But what was your faith background?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, John, for having me on here, and everything you said is true. We did do that conference together, and you were amazing, man. You really were. And I got to tell people about you, John. What you see is what you get. I mean, you weren't somebody that was like, hey, I'm the talent and I'm here and, I'm giving my talk and you really helped me in a lot of ways to I remember them praying over us in the beginning, and you really helped me with my courage, because I'd never given a talk in front of people. I decided to speak in front of 1,000 people for the first time for some reason. I don't know that was a good idea, but I just want to say thank you, because you were so gracious and helpful, and you have sort of put me under your wing over the last few years and invited me to give talks at your conferences, and even invited my wife out and covered that. And so I've never forgotten that. I mean, you are a good friend, and I thank you for your friendship, because I don't know, without that encouragement and without that support, whether or not I'd be here right now doing this. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Got it, bro.
Just from here. So as far as the faith background, all the mushy stuff's out of the way. I was a former Baptist. I was born and raised here in Memphis, Tennessee. I still live here now, 43 years old, and lived here all my life. And my parents were from a small town in Mississippi, and it was one of those stories that mom and dad dated from the 7th grade, high school, homecoming queen and king, and dad was a basketball star and all this stuff. And eventually moved to Memphis, which is about an hour up the road. Started having a family, and we lived in the same house, or they lived in the same house for about 40 years. Raised us as Baptists. They were raised Baptist. And that was where my faith life was. I mean, I went to an Episcopal school that was in the neighborhood because in Memphis, there's, not a lot of great, safe public schools out there, at least at the time. So my parents worked hard to try to send us to this private school just to, I think, for the safety factor more than anything else, and just having a place where they knew their kids could go and not have to deal with a lot of stuff. But that was foreign to me. I did enjoy that perspective, but my family, in my community growing up was at my church. I mean, if you go back to my parents' house, or you find some photo albums that are, in a box at my house now, you'll find pictures of me and the same group of kids from the time we were babies to toddlers to, elementary kids, middle school, high school. And that's where my life was. The Episcopal school was sort of, there was a lot of entitlement there and a lot of money. My family didn't have a lot of that. So I was sort of shunned there. And so I found my family in that community and was involved every day the church was open. I mean, in the summertime, especially, if the church was open, me and my buddies were there, and we were going on youth group trips and mission trips and vacation Bible schools and all of those things. And I really fell in love with the Lord, there. I really met Jesus and built a relationship with him and was baptized there, and was in that community all the way until I was about 18 years old. And Memphis is sort of this melting pot of SEC schools. It's right in the middle of, Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Tennessee, all those things. So a lot of kids' parents in that group went to these other schools. And when these kids hit college age, they all started talking about, well, I want to go to Auburn because my dad did, or I want to go here. Well, I never really, knew where I wanted to go to school. I was a fan of Memphis. I knew you were supposed to go to college. I started working in an auto parts place at 16 because my dad said, get off the couch and get a job. So I had that going for me, but I just enrolled at the University of Memphis, and for the first time in my life was surrounded by thousands of people, but didn't really have any community. I was going to work, going to school, going to work, going to school, seeing people that, seemed interesting, seemed cool, beautiful girls, but not many of them ever really spoke to me. And I was really lonely, man, coming from that community. And so I started to seek that out in my life. And, there was this beautiful girl. She was on Palm Squad, and I've been trying to talk to her forever. Was getting nowhere, possibly because I look like this. But I noticed guys would come in the room and she would talk to them. And the common thing that they had was a shirt with Greek letters. So I thought maybe I should get one of those shirts. And I had a guy in town that I knew from high school, was a couple years older than me, that was involved in the fraternity. I called him. He was the rush chairman, which means, for those unfamiliar, he was in charge of bringing in people to join the fraternity. So I called him. He said, yeah, come on, see if you're a good fit. Turns out I was, and I eventually was initiated in that fraternity. And that's when I quit going to church for about 10 years of my life.
So, all right. So that's, for those that are out there, you think about how familiar that may sound, just from a lot of kids end up going to college and losing their faith, right? And putting their stock into, again, communities, right? But not the most healthiest of communities.
Sure.
And of course, God kind of goes to the wayside. So, all right. So that's where you are as far as that journey. Take us to the next step. What's that next chapter in your life?
Well, like I said, looking back with hindsight, I can see a lot of the mistakes I made that we'll talk about, I'm sure, here in a minute, were related to a lot of wounds in my life. I didn't realize how big until the last few years that I had a father wound. I love my dad, but he was born and raised with 6 kids on a farm, didn't have a lot of I love yous or I'm proud of yous. So I didn't receive a lot of those growing up. So looking back now, not only did I miss the community I had at my church, but I was also seeking approval in my life from everywhere. I wanted everybody to like me. I wanted people to be proud of me. I wanted to impress people. I wanted people to like me, which is often where that shows up in these things. And, when I give talks to high schoolers, John, which you do too,
Mm-hmm.
I always tell them, freedom's a good thing if you know who you are. And very
Yeah.
quickly, I lost who I was, and that freedom that we all long for. I'm going to leave my parents. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to have beer in the fridge. I'm going to whatever it is that you may be thinking. And if you're a younger person out there, it's dangerous if you don't have a solid foundation of who you are. And I had quickly walked away from that. I was working at this auto parts place, Napa Auto Parts, and was quickly moving up. And so I was making more money. And within a couple of years, I was a warehouse manager. I was making about $35,000 a year, which is a lot of money for a college kid with nothing but a car note and $100 fraternity house bill, to live there.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was trying to find these friends and grow into relationships with people started finding out I had money, and they're like, well, hey, this guy's, he's got a car and he's willing to drive and he can, pay for alcohol and he can pay to get us in clubs. And when we need food, he's willing to buy us lunch or whatever. So all of a sudden I was pretty popular, and I made the mistake of thinking it was because of me and not because of what I could do for people. Pretty quickly I started to look around and said, well, what is it that makes these people like each other? What is it that they have in common? And I mentioned some of it, the drinking and things like that, but drugs came along with that, chasing women. So I started to act like the people that I wanted to be a part of. Started drinking very heavily. Started trying every drug. I was smoking weed. I did ecstasy. I took LSD. I took all sorts of different pills, Adderall, things like that. And then, one night I made a terrible decision to do cocaine in my life. And that was a decision that followed me for the next 17 years of my life. John, I was over at a guy's house on Sundays. Some of these fraternity brothers I hung out with were watching football, started drinking too much, stayed over there too long, started smoking pot. And about 7:30 or 8 in the evening, I was thinking, man, I got to get home. And this was for you, anybody young out there. There was no Uber or Lyfts or anything like that. And Memphis has never been the cab capital of the world by any means. So it was like either you find a ride from a buddy or you drive home, or you don't, you stay where you are. Well, I got up and started looking for these guys in the house to try to find a ride, and I couldn't find anybody. I started walking past the bedrooms and stuff, and I started hearing some voices, and all of a sudden I opened this door that's cracked, and there's a bunch of guys, standing over a dresser with a bunch of white lines on it. And immediately I knew it was cocaine. I kind of shut the door, tried to, and they were like, hey man, come on in. You've already seen it now. I never knew they were doing this. I wasn't around it. I'd never seen it. I guess they'd hidden it from me, but everything in my body said, like, dude, this is the one you don't want to do. This is the after school special. Turn around, get out of here, find another way home. But they told me, like, if you do a little bit of this, you're gonna wake up. You'll be able to get home. And John, I made a terrible decision, and I leaned over. I took a line, and that was the start of a hell in my life for a long time. I didn't realize it was a hell until later. But I sat on that couch feeling like I could run through a wall. I sat there for about 2.5 hours, and then finally got up the courage to drive home. I got home at the time. I was in between apartments in the fraternity house, and so I was living with my parents. And I just felt thankful to get home, and said I will never do that again in my life. And I thought that I was going to stick to that, but John, that wasn't the case.
So a couple of things there, because I think so much, unfortunately, I think many of the listeners and those who may watch this hereafter, and those who've heard your story before can relate to, is a couple of things. One, you described the father wound. You and I think connected on that very issue, just because I have a father wound as well. And I think not realizing how much it affected me and how it manifested itself in our good behaviors in our, young adult life. Right. The other piece is really trying to find out who you are by being everything that you aren't.
Yeah.
And really trying to define, and really that search for community, and then just getting swallowed up by, the wave of the culture and the wave of people who are lost themselves, and which so many people out there I'm sure can relate. And, you have got all kinds of viewers, whether they're parents who've lost their children to that same type of situation, or even, other just fellow brothers and sisters out there who are watching their friends kind of drink or smoke or whatever their life away, in that same sense. So John, on that point, where was God at this point, if at all, in your journey? Was there ever a tug back, like, intuitively and consciously you kind of knew, like, man, this is, I got to get out of this situation. This isn't good for me, but you're just so caught up. What was it like for you, and where was God at this point?
Well, I was a pretty sheltered kid. Like I didn't get in trouble a lot. I mean, if we did something stupid, it was like shot somebody's window out with a BB gun or something like that. It wasn't, we weren't out there like stealing stuff or going to, getting arrested or anything like that. So it's pretty sheltered from those things. And, in the young part of my life, I wanted to live for the Lord, and I knew right from wrong. And even in that moment, I knew right from wrong. But John, as you kind of alluded to, once you start going down certain paths and you start looking to make other people and their opinions of you and their priorities a priority in your life instead of God, that becomes a God in your life. I mean, much like the Israelites, Moses leaves for a while. They go, man, we're nervous. Let's get a golden calf built. And all of a sudden they're off to walking in the ways of God. So, I wasn't at that point in my life where I like disliked God or I didn't love him anymore. I was still praying, but it turned to that place in my life where, you're praying for what suits you. You're praying for when you need something. It's not really about, hey, Lord, I'm going to give you my day today, right? I want to follow your will. It's more like, hey, God, thanks for the paycheck I got this week. And thanks for these cool people I'm running around with now. And thanks for that hot girl that's, wanting me to talk to her now. And just very selfish, self-centered prayer. And so that was kind of where my relationship was like. I wasn't going to church. My parents kind of went to church with us until we were old enough to go on our own. One thing I did miss saying was at that church I was going to, the youth group was basically the last group for young adults. There wasn't another group until my parents' age. And like, who wants to go to Sunday school or things like that with your parents in the room? You jumping from 18 to, 40 something, late 40s at that time. So, as I was saying, I went home that night thinking I wouldn't do drugs again. Well, I found myself with the same group of guys at another one of their houses that next Friday night. And I walked in, and this time it wasn't hidden. It was right there on the coffee table. And again, I should have turned around. I had that kind of hair on your neck feeling when your spidey sense or whatever you want to call it goes off. And I ignored it, and I sat down, and I chose the opinions of others over what I knew to be right and wrong in my life. So I sat down, did some of that. It became a common thing. I started to make what Dr. Bob Schutz, a friend of mine, and you may know him too, John, but he talks about in his books like unholy vows. I'll never have the guy's number. I'll never do it by myself. I'll never buy it. All those things. And very quickly in my life, those started to fall. I started to see success in my work life. I was a functioning drug addict, or on the way to becoming a functioning drug addict. I moved from that warehouse to working in a store, and then I was assistant manager, and then I was a manager for a time. Then a sales position came open, and turns out I was really good at selling things to people and building relationships. And so all of a sudden I was a kid that dropped out of college because my dad looked at me and said, you're doing nothing but partying and getting goose eggs, and I'm not paying for it anymore. So you're going to work full time, or you could figure out what else you're going to do, but I'm not, you're getting out of college. Well, I stayed living in the fraternity house. I started making six figures pretty quickly in my life. I would go to work and work 8 to 5 and, be fine. And 5 o'clock hit, and man, it was drinking and partying and everything else. I was very lonely in my life at that time. I started aging out of that college age. I was getting to be 24, 25 and, going to the same bars and doing the same thing. And the girls were younger, and the people my age had kind of moved on where I hadn't. And so I was very lonely, and these group of guys that I was doing the drugs with, they started kind of maturing, which we're all supposed to do, and leaving boyhood behind and getting jobs and leaving that sort of lifestyle. And there was only me and a couple of them left. And I remember you talked about my life with God, praying like, God, I'm lonely. I'm in a place where I seem to be getting in trouble. My life's nothing but drinking and drugs and, rinse and repeat, go to work, drinking, drugs, rinse and repeat. And I was like, I'm so lonely in my life. And John, I started telling so many lies. And people ask me all the time, like, what's the worst part of being an addict? Yes, the physical ache of the drugs, the addiction, your body craving it almost with the clock, and being on a schedule that way physically. But the worst part's the lying, because you just start to be okay with one lie, and one lie compounds, and you begin to think, man, it's a lot easier to not tell the truth than it is to tell somebody the truth. And you're constantly looking over your shoulder like, what if somebody finds out? What if I say the wrong thing? What if this doesn't match up with this? One of the worst things I hated was when somebody came up to me and said, hey, you remember the other day when you said this? I'm like, no, I don't. And what did I say? And oh my gosh, what if it had to do with this? And what if they figure? So that was constant in my life. But I do remember being very selfish and praying to the Lord, look, I'm lonely. And, at that time I was watching porn and stuff, because I didn't have a girlfriend, and I had urges that were put on by the drugs and the alcohol. And I remember praying, I just want to meet somebody in my life. And I was one of these guys that thinks that like things in your life happen to you automatically to mature you. Like I had no idea what St. Paul's teaching of like there comes a time to put away childish things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's your choice. It's not something that happens to you. So I waited on these moments, and just a lot of times they never came, and I just kept diving into the drugs and the alcohol. So long story short, there, the only time I really talked to God was when I needed something, right? And that's not the relationship you want to have with God. I mean, God's not going to honor the things when we're not giving our life back to Him. And at that time in my life, I certainly wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, for us Catholics, we talk about, being in the state of grace, and when you're not, right, when we're living in mortal sin and a life away from God, we're cut off from that grace, cut off from the very life of God.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, that is something that kind of speaks to this moment and chapter in your heart. So at this point, you're single. You're obviously living a wayward life, kind of falling to the addictions and really the woos of the world as it relates to self-soothing, numbing of different pains that we know are probably, like you stated, consequence of father wounds and so on and so forth. So where does your beloved bride step into all of this?
Sure.
Where do you get into that chapter where you're like, okay, you're making good money,
Mm-hmm.
for all intents and purposes, right? I mean, you've got kind of it going on as far as you're living the party life or whatever it is. And so where does Angela come into all of this?
Well, it was like the beginning of God throwing me a lifeline looking back at it. I'd become a chameleon among men. As you're alluding to, I was a very successful salesman. I was a Fortune 250 salesman of the year. I mean, I was making more than 200 grand, a lot of years as a 20-year-old kid. Um, from the outside looking in, people would say, man, that guy's got the world by the tail. I mean, all these different things, the car, the house, all those stuff. But I was a broken mess inside. And one weekend, my sister Amy, my little sister, she's a year younger than me. She'd gone off to college to play volleyball when she was 18 and really hadn't just now came back actually with her family a few years ago. But she would come back every, for holidays and things like that to visit. And one weekend she called me, said, I'm coming in town. I want to see some of your friends, and what are you guys going to be doing? And I said, well, we go to this bar on Friday nights called the Sports Pub. And we play Golden Tee golf and drink some beer and hang out and see what's going to happen with the night. And so she said, all right, I'll come up there and meet you. So she did. And, I'd been out to eat a couple times with my parents and lately before that. And I'd seen this girl I knew in college. Her name was Angela, which you're alluding to, which eventually became my beloved wife. But she was a girlfriend of one of my good friends. In fact, a guy that I was doing a lot of this with. For a long time in college, I thought that they were going to get married. I mean, they dated forever, like 5 years in college, something like that. And then I think I was there the night that they broke up. Just thought, well, they'll get back together. And this was one of those times where they didn't. And he moved on and met another girl and eventually, got married. And so, I saw Angela out one night at like an Outback Steakhouse with my parents, and she was hostessing or something to pay her way through college. And I was like, hey, Angela, how you doing? And I'd filled out, probably had a pretty terrible goatee or something at the time. And like, she looked at me. I had hair, obviously, at that time. I was still blessed with that. I don't have that anymore. Spoiler alert. But I remember saying hi to her, and she looked at me like, who the heck's this dude? And she came by the table. I said hi to her again. She looked at me like, why is this guy talking to me like he knows who I am? And I saw her again out somewhere, and same thing, didn't speak to me. So here we are on this bar with my sister that night, and I'm playing Golden Tee with my buddies by this where you come in, and my sister's standing there, and here Angela comes in again, and she says hi to everybody there but me. And I'm going, what is this? What is her problem? Like, what did I do to her? I was always nice. Like, I never hit on her because she was my, best friend, one of my best friend's girlfriends. And she goes over and sits at this table with some people I knew. Well, I sit down with my buddies and I say, what are we going to do tonight? Long story short, they say, we're going home. My little sister looks at me and says, I'm going home. And I'm like, dude, it's 7:00. I got a pocket full of drugs, which, my buddies knew about, not my sister. Well, what are we going to do tonight? We're not going to go to another bar. We're not going to go look for women. We're not going to do any of that. And they all said, no, I'm going home. Well, two of them stayed. And all of a sudden, my sister left, said goodbye. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do? Well, this other girl walks in the bar. Turns out she was on one of my sister's volleyball teams in high school. She recognizes me, comes over and says hello, and then goes and sits down. Well, a couple minutes later, she walks back over and says, "Hey, John, um, is your sister Amy around?" And I said, "Well, she was here and she just left. I'm sorry you just missed her." And she goes, "Well, hey, this girl that I'm sitting with at this table over here really wants to talk to you." I was like, "Who?" And she starts pointing. I said, "Angela." And she goes, "You know her?" And I go, "Yeah, I know her. I've talked to her like 3 times last 2 weeks. She doesn't want anything to do with me." In fact, I'm kind of angry about that. Like, I don't know why she's being, I probably used a choice word at the time that I can't use on here. But she goes, "Oh my gosh, I'll be right back." So she goes to the table. Next thing I know, she comes back over and she says, "She did not know that you were you." And I'm like, "Well, I guess that explains why she was sort of rude to me, And she goes, "Well, she wants to talk to you." And I said, "About what?" John, obviously I wasn't a ladies' man at the time because this wasn't going through my thick skull. So I get up, I walk over there. My buddies are off doing something else. And I sit down and say, "Angela, what do you want?" She goes, "Well, hi." And I said, "Hey, I mean, you want to talk to me now? I've seen you a lot lately." She had no idea who I was. Like I said, I filled out all those things. So we start talking, we start catching up, and I'm sitting there still thinking about where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. And one of my buddies walks up and goes, "Hey, I'm going to take Matt home, and then I'm going to go over to this other bar." So I said, "Okay, I'll go with you." Next thing I know, he's like looking at me going, "No, you should stay here." And I go, "Why would I stay here? All y'all are leaving. Everybody's gone. Why would I stay here?" "You should stay here." "Why would I stay here, man? Like, are you not hearing me? Is something wrong with your ears? Why would I stay here?" Next thing I know, he starts going, "You should stay here." I'm going, "What's wrong with your neck?" And I look over and Angela's looking at me. And I said, "Do you want me to stay or something?" She goes, "Yeah." And I go, oh. All of a sudden, this is one of my best friend's ex-girlfriends. The bro alert thing starts going off. My buddy leaves and I decide to stay. So we start talking. We talked a lot that night. We went to another place and just were alone and talked more and where we could hear better than in that bar. And eventually she gave me her number. I asked her out. We went out the next night. And John, I had never met a woman like her. Even though I knew her in college, I didn't know her, know her. But it was love at first sight that night, man. It really was. Like I hadn't met a woman like her. We started dating. About a year goes by. Somewhere in the process, she tells me that the guy she's going to marry is going to be Catholic. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm the man for the job. So I went to the nearest RCIA class and signed up, and chivalrously gave up my faith for hers, my faith I didn't practice anymore. And I thought at that point in my life that it was going to change. I was going to get married. This is the point where I got to grow up. I got to be a man. I got to leave this stuff behind. But John, I mean, it didn't happen like that. Marriage was not the thing that cured my ails at that time.
Man, you are speaking to a big, big issue out there. And I hope the women that do watch this, and the men, but primarily the women, and I'm super grateful for Angel. I'm super grateful for my own wife, Nicole, for the women that stood by us, knuckleheads, Amen, as we found our way back to the one, but not without damage that has been done or without their sacrifice or their prayers. But I think you're speaking to something out there where it's like seeing the different motives of folks when they decide to join the church, right? Or we've been involved in marriage prep for years upon years now, and we get that. Well, why are you here? Why are you getting married in Catholic Church? Because of her, and it's always a wooing of her, not a wooing of God, right? And and to your point though, and I say this often. You just made that comment about marriage didn't cure your ails, and I was just like, I've always said, in my own personal story, just because I married a good woman doesn't make me a good man. Right?
Amen.
And just those things that come along with that. So I want to, just to be mindful of the time, because I do want to get to the story. So here you are. Yeah, you came into the church with obviously motivated by the fact that Angela, your beloved bride, is like, "Yo, the dude I'm marrying is Catholic, bro." And so unless you're checking that box off, it ain't going to be you. So you decided to get into RCIA. And then, so what's that story look like? You came into the church and
came into the church. Yeah. So we went to RCIA at a parish downtown in Memphis that we enjoyed going to. It was not the best RCIA class. And to be honest with you, John, a lot of the things they brought up scripture wise and all that, I a Baptist that was trained well, right? Sword drills and read through scripture tons of times, Bible a bunch of times before I was a certain age. And so I could quote scripture with the best of them. So I just kind of looked like a guy that knew and was all in. And I sort of blew off the Mary stuff and all that and just said, I just want to marry Angela. So I did. We got married in the church, but I was going to mass really under protest. I started having feelings of, man, I left my faith behind for this. And why are people standing up and doing this? And it's just so different and all of those things. And I thought that, well, things will get better. Well, John, I just got more selfish, right? Like I sort of probably had a grudge about leaving my faith. My mother had told me, I don't care what faith you're in as long as you're going to church. But it didn't cure it. Like I said, I thought getting married would be the thing that flipped the switch, and it didn't. I was still doing the drugs, hiding it behind her back. I did drugs the night before I was married. Just continue to do those things. And now with a wife and responsibilities, because a year later we had Jacob. I'd always wanted to be a father. I always told myself I was going to be a more active, and whatever that kid wanted to do, especially if it was a boy, I was going to be right there. And, they're going to have to pull me away from his Legos and everything else. I was just going to be a good dad. And Jacob came along and didn't fix it. Having a kid didn't make me, mature and all those things. So shortly after that, my mother passed away from cancer. That's a long story in itself, but I had not been present for all of those appointments and all of that, and was actually the first one I went to is the one where I found out where she was going to die when the doctor walked in the room and said, there's nothing that we can do. It's moved to her brain. And that's what really, threw gasoline on this fire of my hidden addictions. I rode home or followed my parents home that day to their house. They were collecting things to take to the farm where they were retiring in Mississippi, where they were from. And I remember talking with my mother, who was so calm and said, I knew this could happen. But I didn't want to hear that. I wanted my mother alive. I didn't want to lose her. And quite frankly, when they left, I kicked my porch as hard as I could, my parents' porch, and looked up at the sky and screamed, I hate you, God, and I'll never worship you again in my life. If somebody that's good, that has worshiped you, without fault, the way she has to die like this, and a scumbag, lying drug addict like me gets to live, then I don't want anything to do with the type God you are. And right then and there, I told him I hated him and I would never worship him again. Jacob wasn't even a year old when my mother passed away, and I was angry that my kids wouldn't get to know my mother, but they get to know Angela's, and there was just a lot of self-centeredness there. And so I started diving into the drugs and alcohol more. I mean, I got to where I was drinking 20 beers a night, 15, 20 beers a night, doing a 40 bag of Coke every other day, hiding it from Angela. I had the perfect excuse now. She just thought he doesn't know how to handle grief. She had no idea of the other things that was the addictions and, with the drugs and how bad they were. Well, she tells me shortly after that we're expecting again. And this time it's not one, but two. I'm proud to say in the picture behind me, you can see my beautiful identical twin daughters, Allison and Caitlin, that are healthy. Jacob turned out healthy. He's 11. He's in the other sports picture back there with me. But again, here's a moment where I think, okay, twins, now I got 3 kids, dude, it's time to man up, time to be a grown up, leave this stuff behind. But I couldn't do it. I was so far in there at that time that, nothing was helping me. I was a good dad when I wanted to be, a good husband when I wanted to be. But dude, I kicked it into overdrive. I had raised my sales so much, and I was 100% commission, that I had demanding customers, and the stress of that, it was overwhelming. Thinking if I lose one of these things, all this is going to crumble. The house, the money, the lifestyle we built, all of that. I was a slave to my possessions and a slave to what I'd worshipped, which was money and my job. And so there were 2 nights that came up. I was sitting up late every night. Angela had sort of abandoned me at this point. Not abandoned me, but just because that sounds wrong. She basically got to the point in her life where she's like, I'm going to bed. I'm going to put the kids to bed. I'm going to go to bed. We were ships passing in the night. I was selfish. I spoke to her in such a terrible way. Some of the worst things that I'm regretful for is the way that I talked to her. And then every night I would sit up till 2 a.m. and I would do my drugs and drink. And then I would watch porn and be impure with myself because I was afraid to go back to the bedroom with her and not be able to partake in the marital act because of the effects of the drugs. It was the worst I've ever felt in my life. And one of those nights I got up at 2 a.m. I went back to bed, fell asleep pretty quickly, which was unusual because cocaine doesn't let you go to sleep quick.
Mhm.
Had a heart attack feeling about 20 minutes after I went to bed. My heart was beating out of my chest. I fell out of the bed, crawled to the bathroom, and thought, "This is it. I'm going to die." Angela didn't wake up, and I was thinking, "This is it. This is it. This is it. I can't catch my breath. I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to die. Everybody's going to know. Everybody's going to know." And I thought I should call out to her. I need to call her to call an ambulance. But I was so selfish. I said, no, I'd rather die right here than have to come to face with her and the children on what's been going on in my life. I wanted to reach out to God, but I was, like I said, I hated him. So I refused to do that. And I grabbed the towel, shoved it in my face, started to try to slow my breathing. And for some reason I was able to. I crawled back in bed and said, that's it. I'm going to give this up. And the next morning I got up and poured out the drugs and said I was done. At 4:30 the next morning, or 4:30 the next afternoon after work, I was back there buying more. Same thing, 2 a.m, go to bed, heart beating out of my chest, come out of the bed, hit the floor, crawl to the bathroom, saying, this is it. I'm only going to get 2 strikes. I don't know if I'm going to get another one. And in that moment, I felt myself again, you need to call out to Angela. You need to call out to God. You need help. But stubbornness, right? We're men, and we have that mentality of, I'm going to get out of this myself, right? I'm a man. I don't need anybody or anything. And in that moment, I remembered, the pressure of all the lies and not being able to tell the truth to anybody for so long hit me. And I thought, you know what? I don't believe in a lot of this stuff, but at least if I go to confession, I can tell somebody about it. I can get that off my chest. And there's a men's conference coming up this week. And it was the same conference, 2 years prior that you and I spoke to, when this happened. So I went to that conference that weekend. Angela must have thought, man, something's working. He's going to change. But I went to just go to confession, and I found a priest there that I didn't know, went in and just spilled everything, and, told him I didn't want to get in trouble. I wanted to change my life, didn't want to get in trouble. And he kind of yelled at me and chastised me and said it wasn't about me. It was about being serious about receiving God's mercy. And, to the point where I was like already crying, and he was making me cry more, like, yelling at me. And I was like, dude, Jesus was much nicer than you last time I was in here. The one time I went to confession before. But I went home thinking I was going to change. And I really made my mind up that I was going to. And I lasted about 4 days, John. And that following week was Holy Week. And I sold something huge at work. I was going to make a ton of money. And endorphins went off in my head or something and said, I need to celebrate. I remembered the promise I'd made to God that I was going to be different. But I broke that promise that afternoon. I went to pick up drugs, and the police happened to be watching that dealer's house. And I made it about a mile down the street to pull in a gas station. And next thing you know, whoop, whoop, DEA's behind me, thrown in the back of a Tahoe, taken down to organized crime, interrogated, told if I squealed, they would help me, which wasn't the case. They threw me in the back of a patrol car, took me downtown, and it was in a line there waiting to get let into the jail that a police officer asked me. He said, what's your story, man? You don't look like you've ever been in trouble. And I said, I hadn't. And I said, I made a lot of mistakes. I just want to call my wife. And he had a kindness there. It's a place that I look back and see where God was in my life. He got my phone out. And when I told him I was afraid of what she might say, he said, is this about you or is this about her? And man, what a question to be posed in that moment, because it was all about me, all in my life, right? All through my life at that point. Trying to speed through this a little bit. I know we have a time thing. So I call my wife. Angela answers. She thinks I'm dead. It's been several hours since I was supposed to be home and picking up Jacob. I tell her I'm in the back of a police car about to be arrested for the possession of cocaine. And she says, I hate you, and hangs up the phone. And I didn't blame her. She finally had her answer. She knew something was going on. And I was more worried about going into one of the, 5th worst countries in the world for crime, and that jail in that town. So I go in there. It's about 4 a.m. They take my mugshot. I go back. They give me clothes and process me. I get one more call. I call Angela again, and she says, I know where you are. It's 4 a.m. I don't care. You can rot in there. I've got to take the kids to school and go to work because you're not here. And so I get my bag of belongings, toilet paper, toothbrush, all those things, and I start walking down this, cell block with all these guys. And it becomes real at that point. I kept thinking the whole time, I'm going to get out of this. I'm a salesman. I taught my way out of it. Mm-hmm. And I remember standing in front of that cell and just praying that no one would be in there with me. And I watch as this cell door opens. They tell me to go in. I turn around. The cell door closes. And I'll never forget, it was like boom, 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 boom. And the door locks. And I turn around, and it's like my life's over. For the first time since I was a kid, I can't go anywhere. I can't eat anything without somebody's permission. If I want to go to the bathroom, I got to do it in front of God and everybody. I turn around, look at these bunk beds, and they're disgusting. God knows what on them. And so I take a blanket out and I throw it on the bottom bunk. I lay down and I passed out, and I put one over my over my face. And by the grace of God, I fell asleep face down on that bed. I woke up a couple hours later and thought I had had a nightmare and I was at home, until I sat up and my head hit the bottom of a steel bunk bed. And that's when I realized that I wasn't having a nightmare, that I wasn't at home, but I was in jail. John, I threw my legs over the side of the bed. There's a cinder block wall about right here. The claustrophobia that I didn't even know I had started to set in because I'm 6'8" and I was in a 8x8 cell maybe at the most. And I just started rocking back and forth and just rubbing my arms, and that feeling from the restroom at my house that night, that panic attack started to hit me again. And I started saying, no, 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 no. This can't be it. This can't be it. Oh my gosh, this isn't real. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my wife, my kids, my job. I'm going to lose everything. No, 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 no. And then all of a sudden in that rocking, and in that worry, the strangest thing happened. Like this peace came over me. And I can't, to this day, I can't accurately explain, but I felt myself slow down and quit the rocking. And I stopped completely. And all of a sudden I heard out of my own voice these words that at least now I don't have to lie anymore. At least now everyone will know who I am. And it was like the weight of the world that I've been carrying forever fell off of me. And I came to grips with my situation that moment. And I thought, what have I done? How did I get here? And as I started to cry and think about those things, I thought, I know where it happened, the day that I walked away from Jesus Christ in my life. And I hit my knees and it had been so long since I talked to God and so long since I had really practiced the faith that I forgot how to even talk. So I hit my knees and I just said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the things that I've done. I've been such a terrible person, a terrible father. You've given me all these things and I've squandered them, Lord. And if you'll just give me an opportunity to be the man that you made me to be a better man, then I'll give you the rest of my life. I don't even know what that means anymore, but I'll give you my life. And I sat down and shortly after that, this bailiff comes and they tell me I can, make a phone call. And I did. I called everybody in my life, and all those fraternity brothers and my family, and no one would answer the phone. And finally my sister answered. She told me that Angela was bailing me out, which surprised me. She said it would be 9:00 that night, probably before I got out. It was Good Friday. I went back to the cell and I spent the rest of the day trying to remember what it was like when I followed Jesus. And I remembered the young man I was and how my life was so different and full of joy. And I made a decision in my life right then that I wanted that. I didn't know how to get back to it, but I just asked him to help me. And so pretty quickly thereafter, the bailiff comes again and says, your wife's here, or you have a visitor. I go in the scene like Law and Order. I sit down on the glass and the payphone. It's my wife and my mother-in-law, and we're all crying. And Angela looks at me and says, I'm not going to divorce you. It has nothing to do with you, but everything, to do with the vows I made in the church that day. So she told me, you can't come home. Your sister's going to come get you. You need to go to your dad's farm for Easter weekend until I just need time away and time to think. And so I went back to my cell. Just the mercy she showed me in that moment, not to divorce me. I couldn't fathom that kind of love or that kind of commitment to anything. I certainly didn't have it on my end. And next thing I know, they call me. It's 9:00 at night. It's time to leave. They give me all my valuables. I look down. I see my work's called a million times, so they had found out. I walk outside looking for my sister, and it's not my sister, but it's my father. And as I said before, my father was a hard man growing up. There was a lot of punishment. There was a lot of be a man, put your head down, never complain, work hard. You don't need anybody or anything, and certainly never I love you or I'm proud of you. But I walked up to him just dreading, even at 6'8" and 275, and my dad being, 70, late 70s and out of shape and everything else. I'm still like a little kid who broke something in the house. And I was waiting on a slap or a condemnation or something. And he just looked at me and he grabbed me and he hugged me and he said, I love you, son. Are you okay? And I would have given anything in my life to hear those words. And John, I can't explain it, but we got in the car and he took me to my house and I got my clothes and I walked in my house. It was empty. And I longed for my children and for Angela so bad, and went down to my dad's farm. And that next Saturday was torture. All I could think about was how Angela was in this mess and it was my doing and people knew about it. It was the elephant in the room and her family was going to be celebrating Easter. So the next morning I get up and I have this desire to go to mass, which I'd never really had in the 11 years I've been Catholic. And I go to this small Catholic room in Bruce because it's like 600 people in the town and most of them aren't Catholic. And the mass isn't there. I thought I'd missed it. The sister who helps out there, that a traveling priest, shows up, sees me in my car screaming and yelling and hitting the steering wheel. Probably thought, what the heck's the matter with this guy?
Mm.
But I got in the car and drove to the next town, where she told me they were having mass because there was too many people. I listened to homily, listened to service, get up to leave because there was a lot of families there. And all of a sudden this hand grabs me as I'm about to leave this 4-H club where they had set up mass. And it's this priest that I had met one time before, years ago, when Angela made me go to Christmas mass down there. And he says, "Hello, John," which struck me. I couldn't believe he remembered my name. And he said, "I don't know where your family is or why they're not here with you, but God wants me to tell you everything's going to be all right." I don't know how he knew. I know how he knew. God told him. But in that moment, I was like, I've got to be a better man. So I went home. My dad took me to court that Monday morning. I was, pled guilty, put in a program called diversion, went for a year for parole visits and drug tests and all those things. But that Monday after I left there, I went to my job, had to deal with all of that. And then I voluntarily checked myself into a behavioral science center. And showing up there I never seen anything like that. Kids on heroin, all these people addicted to stuff that were way worse than I was. All of a sudden my wife shows up in that room. I didn't even know she knew I was there, but she shows up and she says, "I can't let you go through this alone." And I go through an assessment. I wound up going through a 30-day outpatient program, and she lets me come home that night. When she showed up that day, I'm laying in my bed. She was sleeping in my son's bed across the hallway. And I'm kind of king of the hill again, right? I'm in air conditioning. I got my bed. There's TV. There's not weird dudes looking at me. I'm not eating pig slop, There's a private bathroom. And, I'm excited about all this until I looked over and saw that my wife wasn't there, and she was across the hallway. And that's when I realized, you idiot, you can't just stop drinking and doing drugs. You got to be a different man. And a mutual friend of ours had given me a book when he came to a conference in Memphis that my father-in-law made me go to years before, Father Larry Richards, called Be a Man. And I picked that book up out of my bedside table and read it cover to cover that night. And John, it sparked in me an understanding of who I was always supposed to be. And I read 60 Catholic books that year. I started going to mass every day. There was a priest that started teaching me about the importance of the Eucharist and confession, who made me into a lector, who made me go to confession every week and made me show up at 8:15 mass. And it changed my life. And shortly after that, I started leading my family and praying and trying to show Angela I was different. But along the way, God kind of showed me it's not just about showing her you're different. It's about doing what I'm asking of you. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. I went to that conference. Another guy was there. It's the same conference a year later where I'd gone to confession. One of my fellow parishioners was there, and I saw him at an event that night, and he had been to confession. And first time in 16 years, he was running around screaming and hollering and telling everybody his sins and stuff. And I was like, "Hey, man, you need to quiet down. There's women and children in here." And he said, "I don't know why I'm feeling this way." And I told him it's the Holy Spirit. Well, he didn't understand what that meant. He asked me to take him to dinner. He wouldn't leave me alone about it, so I did. I showed up, and all the knowledge that I'd had growing up with the Holy Spirit just kind of spewed out of me. And he said, "Wow, this is amazing. You should start a men's group." I told no one in my life what had happened except for him that night. The Spirit moved me to tell him. I thought he was going to leave, and he said, "Wow, that's amazing. You should start a men's group," which I still can't believe. A week later, we called men together, and we put them all in a room, a bunch of guys we knew, a bunch of guys we didn't. I walked in that room, and I told them everything I've told you, and even in more detail, if you can believe it or not, in that night, and cried and poured my soul out and just said, "We need something else besides a barbecue and drinking and athletic fundraising club at this parish. We need something for men. And let me tell you why." And I went blah. And I just said, "Look, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know that we need to be better, and we need something to help each other. And I can't be the only one broken." And every guy in that room, John, got up after I sat down, and they didn't leave. They shared their own struggles with pornography, with divorce, with alcoholism, with other vices, anything you can think of. That room shared that night. And it was the birth of a men's group that has been out going for 6 years and really launched this ministry, the podcast, and all these other things. So I am sorry for taking so long to tell all that.
No,
but
it
is
brother,
in a nutshell.
I would say that never apologize, because no matter how many times I've heard this story, right? Like,
Yeah.
you and I are brothers. We've known each other for several years now, and every time I hear it, I can't help but being touched and moved to emotion for so many different reasons. but most importantly, because of the love and the mercy and the transformative power of our God. And
Yeah.
of course, again, I think about our wonderful wives who, behind every good man is a great woman, a holy
Amen.
woman of God. And Angela and my wife, Nicole, are definitely those, that those type of women that are saints in the making, no doubt. So brother, as we kind of like round this out, and I don't think there's ever enough time in an hour to try to
Sure.
get through a story like that. And I'm still waiting
Sure.
for both the book and the movie, bro. So if you need like, support or endorsement or, an extra, I'm happy to be part of that with you, because this is absolutely a story that needs to be shouted from the rooftops, right? Because it
Yeah.
echoes to what ails the culture, specifically men today. Of course, there's the father wound piece. There's a lack of understanding of who we truly are as men created in the likeness of God and the image, and the charge that we're given, much like Adam, to serve and protect and defend our wives, our children, and all that God blesses us with as far as gifts. So being faithful stewards of that, but also to the fact that that God can do anything if we just allow him to. It's interesting. I've heard the story so many times. And while I'm moved, the one thing that stood out as you were sharing it with me was the part about giving God your life, because it was much like my own conversion story of that very moment of getting out of the confessional, going through the deliverance prayer in the confessional, and really laying at the foot of the sanctuary before the Blessed Sacrament, where I'm getting ready to lose my wife and my family and my job and everything else. And just crying from the belly of my soul, right? The Bartimaeus cry of, Son of David, have pity on me, and just surrendering everything that you have. And so I know that experience and that feeling so very well. And so it resonates with me. But look at the amazing things, brother. So, God will take even the worst messes of our life. You've heard it, right? God will turn a mess into a message. And I think he's done that. And your story is just so powerful. And I'm so grateful to God for you, for your life, for your family,
You too,
and for
brother.
your ministry. You know what I mean? When you think about Pew Ministries and what you're doing with Just a Guy in the Pew, and the ministry to men. So let's talk about that just for a little bit. So obviously just a guy in the pew, but just Pew Ministries and what you're doing to help solve this problem. Because you didn't just say, oh man, a lot of people, right, just take all of God's mercy and love, boom, I'm good, I'm just going on with my life. And cool, that's awesome for you. But you actually said, no, I'm going to do something about it, right?
Yeah. Well, I tell people all the time when they ask how all this happened, like, we're sitting here in a new podcast studio and, I'm going around the country speaking, and God's really blessed us in a lot of those ways. I never really sought that. I just knew from that group that night that there was a whole lot of other people out there that were walking around like they were fine, but they weren't, right? And that's the struggle we have as men. We're kind of ingrained to like take control of our life, to white knuckle it, to let everybody know that we're fine. We don't need anything. How many guys, how you doing? Fine. The fine answer that's never true. We all know we're broken. And we all know each other's broken, but yet we spend so much energy trying to act like we're not broken when we could spend that energy actually trying to be better, and becoming vulnerable. And that's really what the Lord taught me that night, John, was, much like St. Paul, when he had the thorn in his side 3 times, he asked God to remove it. And God answers him with, no, my power is made perfect in weakness. And what we have to do is what you're talking about is surrender, right? Like we have to start saying, like, I need God in my life and I can't do this on my own. And I wasn't made to do this on my own. And that's why he sent out the disciples 2 by 2. And, the devil knows the places in our hearts that we're hiding, right? Our pornography addiction, our drugs, our alcohol, our anger issues, our infidelity, whatever it is. And as long as we allow those things to stay hidden, the devil has a place to live, right? To root himself in ourselves, in our soul, in our life, in our choices. And becoming vulnerable with ourselves, with God, and with other men allows us to rip those places out and to let the divine healer heal them. That's the root word of vulnerability is vulnus. It means literally wound. And so you rip that off and let God do that. And so what I started to see was, for some reason, I didn't know what I was doing. The guy said, well, you lead the group. I'm like, okay, let me go figure that out. And I just started showing up and being honest and leading with my own mistakes and my own failures, and other guys started to step up and we built a group. And next thing I know, Deacon Jeff Drzymski, who you know well, he got a show on EWTN called the Catholic Cafe. He's here in Memphis. I was in a Cursillo group with him, and he was listening to things we were doing in this men's group, and he said, "Dude, you should have a podcast." And I said, "Get out of here, man! Nobody wants to listen to me." And he goes, I don't think that's accurate, And he said, "I'll build it for you." And so we showed up, and I can't even listen to his first episodes. I cringed because we were like, "Hey, we got a podcast and we love Jesus and stuff," and we're, it's just weird. But we did that, and then next thing you know, people started asking me to speak. I worked for Cardinal Studios for a while, traveled and did things for them. That job kind of went away. The Lord called us to start Virtual Catholic Conference with another buddy of mine, or two buddies of mine now. They're involved with it during COVID. And, at that time when I left Cardinal, my wife came to me again, the angel of my life, and said, "You should start a nonprofit." Well, I did. I had no money. And then Virtual Catholic Conference dropped some money in our lap after we'd paid speakers and, donated to the church and all those things. And I put it in Pew Ministries, and that's what we've been able to grow with and have a base to start building things like websites and, things to help men, the narrow road, all that stuff. And John, what it's brought me to now is, I decided I don't want to just be a guy that travels and speaks. I don't want to be away from my family all the time. It's one of the reasons we built this studio, so we could do a lot of work right here in my home. But I just started to see, like, I want to be like St. Paul and build fruit that lasts. I don't know about you, John, but sometimes I felt like I've gone places and I've given talks and people were inspired, but I always wonder, like, what happens when I'm gone, right?
Yeah.
Like, how long does that inspiration last? So we have started going around the country and doing parish missions called the Restored Parish Mission. And 3 talks, my conversion story, so people could see that Jesus could do anything in your life if you allow him to. 2, restoring your identity, who you are, whose you are, and what you're here for. And 3, the most important thing, developing a relationship with Jesus Christ. And yes, it's Catholic. So we give those talks. And then I've taken everything I've learned in our group and the structures we've used and all of that. And we're going around the country, not just giving the talks, but staying and training men that the pastor has found that he knows to be disciple makers, or men that want to make disciples. And then we train them on how to lead and give them a structure and build a place for them to come each and every week so that they can build authentic relationships with Jesus first and foremost, and authentic relationships with other men, not friendships of convenience, but men that will be there in your life through thick and thin to walk with you the same way that the disciples had one another to walk on those hard roads that they had to walk following Christ. And so at the end of the day, John, all I want to do is help men. I've been given a gift in my life, and Angela and I looked at the story and said, this can either be suffering and pain for us for no reason other than to be painful, or, which is what it would be if we didn't do anything with it, or maybe God gave us this because there's other people out there. And, that's why I don't get tired of telling this story, and I'll tell it until I die, because I get emails like today. A woman wrote into another show I'd been on specifically to try to find my email because her husband is stuck in drug addiction, and as a wife, she doesn't know how to handle it the way that Angela handled it.
Yeah.
That was just today. And so all of these things are gifts. Our pain, our suffering are not meant to just be wounds in our life, but to be learned from, to change us, and then to go out and do what we were all made to do, which is to go and share the good news and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so, look, John, you know as well as I do, you've been speaking in men's stuff for a long time. One of the main problems, if not the main problem in the church, is men. We have abdicated our responsibility. Yeah, we've abdicated our responsibilities. We have not been the husbands and fathers we're called to. We blame a lot of things on the world, but we should blame it on ourselves because we've simply not been the men that God creates us to be. But that doesn't have to be the end of our story, right? Our shame and our mistakes and our guilt doesn't define us. God's love for us as beloved sons is what defines us and makes us who we are and allows us to be who he creates us to be. So through this ministry, John, I get on there every week and do a 30-minute podcast about whatever God has shown me in my life where I've been an idiot or screwed up. I share it with other people hoping that it can help them. And then I go on the road with the parishes that want to do something that will last, whether they use our stuff for a year or 6 months. My goal is to look back in 10 years and say, that parish still has a men's group, no matter what they're doing. It started, it lasted, and now God is working to change other men's life through it. So, brother, that's what I'm trying to do with my life, and I'll do it as long as God allows it and permits it.
That's, and yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think one of the one of the many reasons you and I always hit it off, right? We know what the X factor is and what the problem is, and we're trying to cure that disease, not just treat symptoms. And I think we have a man problem, right? That man problem starts in the home, starts with the man in the mirror, and I think that's contributed to the problem in the church, which ultimately contributes to the problem in the world, right? So,
Yeah.
and so, I appreciate always you opening your heart. I had a couple of folks that are commenting in the chat, and so when you get a chance to watch this offline, take a look at it. Just thanking you for sharing your story. But my brother Rudy out there, who just saw recently at our men's conference as well, I believe, Rudy, I saw you out there. He asked, "What advice or things to avoid, etc., John, can you give to those like him trying to promote and build local fellowship?" This is what you're talking about, what you're trying to solve, right?
Sure. Well, first of all, I tell anybody that wants to lead something to pray about it. Is God calling you to that, right? We don't all have the same gifts. I think many men could lead in different ways, but it's a specific call to lead other men in a group like that. So that's not to deter you, not to make you feel like, well, man, I'm not right or good enough. That's not for me to decide. That's between you and God.
Mm-hmm.
And your spiritual director, if you have one in your life, ask someone, ask the priest. And then I would say, go to your pastor and say, look, I have a desire in my heart for fellowship, for authentic Catholic fellowship. I want to walk in the life that God wants me to walk in with other men. I'm tired of doing it alone. I'm tired of wearing masks everywhere I go and being this guy here and this guy here and this guy here. I just want to be myself, and I need people to do that with. And if you would trust me and help me, Father, then I would love to try to find other men that would help me lead this. And then I want to sit down and form a plan, and we can help with that. Like, that's what we love to do is to sit down and work a plan with pastors and with people that are out there feeling this call to discern it. Because look, if you don't discern it, then you may wind up being a guy that says, I'm going to start something. You don't properly ask your pastor, which is never a good idea, by the way, just a disclaimer there. And then it fizzles out because people aren't showing up, or you're not really equipped to know how to even start. So I would just say, if you're feeling that call, sit with it and pray with it a minute. If you're still feeling that call, go to adoration or whatever you do to connect with God. And if you're feeling that call, then go and present it to your pastor and say, look, I don't know what this means. And you may not even be the guy that's the main formator. Maybe God's calling you to start it, and some of the other men that you reach out to may have some of those charisms. And then all of a sudden you form a leadership team, which is what we promote anyway. Don't try to do it by yourself. You'll burn out and you'll quit.
Yep.
So I would say just sit with it, pray with it, and then go speak to your pastor about the desires on your heart. And if it doesn't go away, then that's a pretty good sign that God is prompting you and pushing you to do something. And then you just kind of look at your understanding of your own gifts and figure out, what role you play in that. But we'd certainly be glad to help you if you're ever interested. You could look at our website and send me an email at justaguyonthepew.com or justaguyonthepew@gmail.com, and we'd be glad to talk to you. But thank you for listening, and thank you for your question.
Yeah. Well, brother, I know we brought you out for kind of our family conference before, but obviously, I even had requests this, I think Ed, he's on the chat here, but he had chatted out on our 1249 Society. He's like, we got to get John Edwards out to a men's conference, because he's a frequent flyer when it comes to World Ablaze men's conferences. So
Sure.
Definitely want to make sure that we team up. I'm looking forward. You're coming out for CMLA, right? And
Yeah, I will be there. So that's submitted the other day. So I'll be there, weekend after next. So going to Las Vegas this weekend for a mission, and then Phoenix the next. So
I will see you, brother, in another week and a half. Me and Miko will be out there. So looking forward to chopping it up there. And then, of course, you and I will see each other again in August. So we're going to be talking shop a lot about how we can fix this problem specifically with men, and all the things that we can do for Holy Mother Church in the world. So, my brother, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Always have fun getting together with you. Definitely, you're one of my favorite people, and one of the men and the families that I pray for daily. So know that you and Angela and the kids are in my prayers, and you keep up the good work with Just a Guy in the Pew and with Pew Ministries. And for those of you out there, please go and visit. John, what's a website to go find all that you're doing and to get you to come out and speak, or to help them with their men's program?
Sure. So the website's justaguyonthepew.com. Several choices at the top for things, store, stuff like that, donate. But you want to go to the events and book John page. There you'll see a couple things. The calendar of speaking events, a pilgrimage I'm doing with Father Larry, the information there about starting a men's group. You can click and follow that, and that'll actually give you a form to submit if you're interested in certain men's groups. And then below all that is a book John thing. So if you want me to just come give a talk or something like that, or a men's conference, then we can do that too. But all that's there at justaguyonthepew.com, book John and events page.
Awesome. Yeah. So definitely check out John. I highly recommend him for any of your events, especially when it comes to men's spirituality and just trying to light the fire of the faithful. It doesn't even have to be men specific. I think the mission itself, or the story of what John's talking about, is helpful to all people, just to know the transformative power of God. And again, for those, share this video. I know, those of you who are watching, those of you who may get this later, share it with people you know. That John has an amazing story. He has an amazing ministry. Again, a beloved brother. I can't advocate enough for him and all that he's doing to use his gifts finally, right, for Holy Mother Church, as my wife will say for me, always nudging me, right? Finally, you're using your God-given gifts to glorify God and for the salvation of souls, rather than to fulfill our own selfish needs and desires. So, brother, know that you're in my prayers. For the people out there, thank you for sticking with us for this hour. John Edwards, my brother with the same Holy Mother, has an amazing story. Go check him out at justaguyinthepew.com and find out all that he has to offer. And so appreciate you guys joining us. We will have more of these types of interviews and episodes with many Catholic faithful out there that have a story to tell or just an amazing ministry. So continue to follow us at worldablaze.org. Find all our social media handles, subscribe to our newsletter, and you know how we do it. We get holy or we die trying. God's peace.